The letter came folded in the bottom of the week's mail, beneath invoices, a seed catalogue, and a parcel wrapped in twine. She almost missed it. The envelope had no return address, just her name written in a careful, unfamiliar hand. She hadn't seen it written in months, not since the station platform. It looked foreign now, like it belonged to someone she used to be. She opened it slowly, standing in the doorway of the ranch house. Morning sun painting the floor gold. I will be passing through your town on my way to St. Louis. I would like a moment to speak with you, for clarity, for closure. I hope time has brought you peace. CB, there was no apology, only a signature that once meant something. She held the letter in her hands for a long time, wind tugging gently at her sleeves like a child wanting her attention. When he stepped through the door behind her, the rancher, the one who never asked for more than she offered, she handed him the letter without speaking. He read it slowly, eyes unmoving, then looked at her. What do you want to do? His voice wasn't possessive, not angry, just open, inviting her to choose. She folded the letter and tucked it back into her apron pocket. I want to stand, she said, not hide. The day he arrived, the sky was blue without flaw, the kind of day meant for weddings or funerals, something significant. The townspeople were already murmuring before noon. Word traveled faster than dust on dry roads. A man in fine boots had come through on horseback, suit pressed, hat to clean for real work. They said he asked for her name at the livery, at the mercantile, at the church. By the time he reached the bakery, Mrs. Galloway already had her arms crossed, flour on her cheekbone like war paint. She ain't the same girl you walked away from, she said flatly. So if you came looking for regret, you best keep moving. He did, by the station, Dot. He waited by the station, same crate, same spot, like he thought time was a trick he could undo. She didn't walk alone. She asked the rancher, the man who saw her every day, who asked nothing and gave everything to walk beside her, not as armor, but as proof that someone could see all she had carried and still choose to stay. The platform was quieter than it had been that day months ago. No train, just wind. She stepped forward first. The man, her former would-be groom, stood up straighter when he saw her, like seeing a ghost made real. He opened his mouth, but no sound came at first. You look well, he said. She did not answer. He took a breath. I suppose you want to know why. I know, she said softly. I don't, he blinked. She stepped closer. I was young, yes, but not foolish. You didn't leave me because I was too young. You left me because you didn't recognize strength unless it wore rouge and curled its lashes. He flushed, eyes darting toward the rancher at her side. I just thought you didn't think, she replied. And now I don't need your reasons. I have roots here. I have peace. I have someone who doesn't see me as a mistake waiting to happen. The rancher didn't move, didn't glare, just stood with his hat in his hands and calm in his eyes. The kind of calm you find after a storm has passed and nothing broke. The man, the one who once promised a future and sent a letter instead, took a step back for the first time. She saw it. He was not cruel, just small, and smallness could do damage. But it couldn't undo her. Not now. They left the platform without another word, walked through town as eyes followed, not with pity, not with judgment, but with respect. Later that evening, back at the ranch, she stood by the small garden near the porch. The marigolds had bloomed, defiantly golden, reaching toward the last warm light of the day. He joined her, a mug of tea in his hand. "You sure you don't regret it?" he asked. She turned to him, eyes soft. "No, I regret the time I spent believing I was hard to love." He didn't reply, just reached out, touched her face with the back of his fingers, the same way wind brushes wheat in late July. "I love you," he said, so simply it didn't even need breath behind it. She closed her eyes, not because she was overwhelmed, but because those words, at last, felt like home, not a rescue, not a prize, just truth. Spoken plainly, like water from a clear spring. "I know," she whispered, "and I love you too." He kissed her, then not with urgency, but with the reverence of someone who understood what it meant to kiss a woman, who had stitched herself back together by hand. That night, they sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the grass like prayers with wings. They didn't talk much, just let the quiet stretch around them, full and content. And in that space, the past loosened its grip. The station, the crate, the girl. In the blue dress, she wasn't gone. She was transformed. If you asked her, years later, what she remembered most about the day she was left behind, she wouldn't mention the letter, or the shame, or the weight. She'd talk about the marigolds, how they bloomed in hard soil, how they grew beside a man who never needed to own her, to hold her heart, and how being forgotten by fate was just a way of being rerouted toward something truer. Maybe you've sat on your own crate, heart folded, hope frayed at the edges. Maybe someone walked away when all you offered was your whole self. But listen close. You were not too much. You were not too late. You were simply waiting for the right eyes, the ones that don't flinch at silence. So don't rush the blooming, don't curse the waiting. Because somewhere out there is someone who buys rope and notices everything. It was early spring when she first brought seeds to the ranch. Not much, just a handful folded in wax paper, passed down from Mrs. Galloway's kitchen drawer. Marigolds, sage, a few sweet peas. They don't ask much from the soil. The baker had said with a knowing smile, "Just a little space, bit of sun, that's all most things ever need." The girl, still unnamed, even now tucked them into her coat pocket before setting out toward the ranch, heart quieter than before, but not empty. No longer wounded, just waiting to bloom. He met her at the gate, as he always did. Didn't speak at first, just held it open like he was welcoming not just a guest, but a season. She'd grown used to his stillness, the way he let her fill the air when she wished to, or left it open when silence was more healing than words. With him, she never felt observed, only witnessed. "I brought something," she said. He looked at her hands. She opened them to reveal the folded paper. "Thought maybe your porch could use a little color." He nodded, one corner of his mouth curved upward, not quite a smile, but close enough to warm the whole afternoon. "Reckon it could," he said. They knelt in the dirt together, side by side. She pressed each seed into the soil, gently, like tucking in a child. He poured water from a dented can, quiet and careful. Their shoulders brushed only once. Neither pulled away. After planting, she stayed. Not because she had to, because the ranch had become something soft, like a song hummed under breath, too familiar to perform. She mended a curtain that fluttered to wild in the breeze. He fixed the latch on the barn door. Neither mentioned how natural it felt to be busy in the same space, to move around each other like two branches, growing toward the same sky. That evening, as dusk draped gold across the ridge, he showed Her a place he hadn't before, a hill behind the stables, quiet and round, with a lone tree standing in the center. A fence encircled it. Simple, weathered, respectful. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. The markers beneath the tree told their own story, one larger, one small, names carved faintly. A woman, a child. Time had worn down the words, but not the reverence. She stood beside him for a long while, arms folded across, her chest, breath slow. You come up here often? Only when I need to remember. She nodded. I think they'd like the marigolds, she said. His eyes met hers, steady and sure. So do I. They walked back without speaking. Not every bond is made of conversation. Some are built in pauses, in shared wind, in the rustle of grass between steps. A few days later, she came with a book of poems, wore her hair braided down her back. He noticed, but said nothing, just held the door a little longer, as though that braid deserved a gentler welcome. She read aloud on the porch while he sharpened tools, lines about time and softness, and the way rivers never force their path, they find it. I never had someone read to me before, he murmured once, not looking up from the blade. She closed the book gently. Then I'm glad I get to be the first. One late afternoon, a summer storm rolled in without warning. She was already at the ranch, helping feed the horses. Thunder cracked, and the wind rose sharp and wild. He ushered her inside just before the rain hit. They stood in the kitchen, wet. From the rush, he lit a lamp. She laughed softly, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. That sky's angry tonight, she said. He handed her a dry cloth. Let it yell. We'll be fine in here. It was the first time he reached for her. Hand not in urgency, not in need. Just a simple brush of fingers across her knuckles. An invitation. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm over and held his with quiet grace, both of them listening to the rain hammer against the roof, as if the heavens had something to prove. I used to think I was made for small things, she whispered, quiet rooms, safe shadows. You're not, he replied. You're made for wide skies, and someone who listens when you speak, even if it's only with your eyes. They stood like that for a long while, not kissing, not confessing, just holding on to the storm, to the moment, to each other. By the time the skies cleared, the sun was nowhere to be seen, but the house glowed warmer than before. He brought out 2 mugs of coffee, and she opened a jar of preserves she'd brought weeks ago, but hadn't yet offered. They didn't toast, didn't clink the mugs together like they were celebrating. But in a way, they were not love, not yet, but the beginning of something more honest than either had dared name before. That night, she stayed past dark. He offered the spare room, clean sheets, a lit candle, the scent of pine from the wash basin nearby. She lay awake for a while, listening to the quiet hum of the night, the creak of the house, the faint echo of wind along the eaves, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she did not feel abandoned. Not by a man, not by hope, not by herself, just here, fully, quietly, without shame. In the morning, she watched through the kitchen window as he saddled his horse. She stood barefoot on the wood floor, hair loose, apron tied without hurry. He turned once to glance back and smiled real this time, a small, whole thing that said what words hadn't dared to yet. Stay a while longer, it said. You fit here, like you've always belonged. She didn't answer out loud. But she set down her bag in the days that followed. She planted more than flowers. She brought life into places he hadn't touched in years, hung lace at the windows, tied wild, herbs from the porch beams to dry, read aloud each morning while the coffee brewed, and he, without changing his nature, softened just enough to let her in. A shelf was cleared for her sewing, a drawer offered for her linens, a chair, once unused, pulled to the porch for her. Shadow to fill. They still didn't speak of love, not directly, but love. True love doesn't always arrive with declarations. Sometimes it slips in through the back door, pours coffee, mends a curtain, and waits for the right moment to call itself by name. Equals by early autumn, the wind carried more hush than heat. Mornings came pale and slow, and the girl, still unnamed to the town, found her rhythm like one finds their footing on a rocking boat. She swept the floors of the tailor's shop before her. The sun was fully risen, pinned lace to collars with steady hands, and stitched long into the evenings by the light of a single oil lamp. The town began to know her, not by her story, but by her silence. Children called her the sewing lady. Women said she had a gentleness to her, like music you can't quite hear, but miss when it stops. Men, mostly, didn't speak of her at all, not out of cruelty, but discomfort. She didn't flirt. She didn't simper. She didn't perform softness for their approval. She simply existed, folded and strung, like a letter never sent. Every week or so, he came, the quiet man on horseback. He never spoke more than needed, just came into town with a list of supplies. And the same careful hands, calloused, sun-browned, respectful. He tied his horse outside the mercantile, checked every buckle on his saddle twice, and walked with the posture of someone who'd been bent by life but hadn't broken. He was not striking in the way young girls dreamed of, but he carried himself like the earth, steady, solid, unmoved by the weather of other people's noise. The first time he stepped into the tailor's shop, he held a torn sleeve in his hand and said only, caught on barbed wire, "Ain't much of a seam left." She took the fabric from him with quiet fingers, her eyes brushing his face only once, long enough to notice he didn't avert his own. "Come back in 2 days," she said softly. He did, then again, a week later. Another shirt, then a coat, missing a button. She suspected he wasn't careless with his clothes, only making reasons to return, and strangely, she didn't mind. His name was spoken quietly in town, but never loudly enough to turn into gossip. Folks said he'd been a widower for some time, had a ranch west of the river, past the bend where cottonwoods leaned like old men in conversation. Lived alone, mostly, raised horses, paid his debts. No one knew much more. No one ever asked. He wasn't feared, wasn't admired, just accepted. And that made her curious. One afternoon, she caught him watching her hands as she threaded a needle, not in the way men usually looked, but as though he was studying the way her fingers moved, the story they told without her saying a word. "You sew like someone who used to sew for dreams," he murmured. She didn't respond at first, but his words rooted in her chest, warm and painful at once. "They weren't big dreams," she said after a long pause. "Just quiet ones." He nodded. "Quiet dreams make the best kind of home." Then he left. No request. No shirt. Just those words. Mrs. Galloway noticed the shift. She always did. "Ranchers watching you like the sky watches rain," she said. One evening, over tea, the girl, still unnamed, raised her brow gently. "Meaning what?" "Meaning," the baker replied. he's hoping, but won't ask for it. Men like him don't call out for thunder. They just listen and wait for it to come if it's meant to. The girl smiled, just faintly. That makes two of us. By late September, the tailor's shop closed early one evening after a pane of glass cracked in the front window. The girl gathered her things and stepped into the fading day, golden light catching the hem of her shawl. He was there, tying a sack of feed to his saddle, pausing when he saw her. "I have curtains that need mending," he said, with a voice like worn, leather low, honest, and without urgency. "If you don't mind coming out to the ranch." Her first instinct was to decline, not out of fear, but habit. Women in her shoes were taught not to accept the unknown. But this man wasn't unknown, not to her spirit. He had waited, watched, never once crossed a line, so she nodded. "I'll come." His ranch was farther than she'd imagined, past fields that hummed with dry grass, across creeks that whispered their way through small hollows. The land stretched wide and unbothered, the kind of place that didn't care for time. He didn't talk on the way, nor did she, but it wasn't silence, not really. Just a gentle quiet between two souls who didn't need to explain their presence. When they reached the house, she paused at the porch. It wasn't grand, wasn't polished, just strong, like him. Inside, everything was clean and plain. The kitchen smelled faintly of cedar smoke and coffee grounds. The curtains were indeed torn, more from age than carelessness. She set to work without a word as she stitched. She noticed things: a harmonica on the shelf, a photograph turned inward on the mantel, boots aligned with ritual care, and above the hearth, a carving of two initials inside a horseshoe, worn down by time, almost invisible. He stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the land instead of her. "I can come back another day to finish," she offered, careful not to sound unsure. "No need," he said, his voice low. "Take your time. I don't rush what matters." She stayed through sunset. When she finally rose to leave, he handed her a paper sack, warm cornbread, and a jar of preserves. "Payment," he said. "More than enough," she answered. But as she rode back into the darkening twilight, escorted quietly by him halfway to town, she didn't think of payment. She thought of belonging. Weeks passed, and she returned, not just for work, but for moments to read beneath the tree near his barn, to watch foals stagger on new legs, to sit in a house where silence wasn't punishment, but peace. Sometimes he'd ride beside her to the creek, where she'd dip her feet and listen to frogs. Once she found him playing the harmonica, a simple tune, full of space and longing. He didn't stop when she approached. He just kept playing, as if the sound itself made her feel welcome. "You don't flinch when I'm quiet," she said once. "Neither do you," he replied. They never spoke of the past, not hers, not his, only of now, how the corn was struggling this season, how the stars moved slower out here, how some trees bent but didn't fall. He offered her nothing but truth, and in that truth, she found something she didn't expect. Not romance, not rescue, but respect. One day, she brought him a stitched handkerchief, blue thread on pale cotton. No initials, just a small wildflower in the corner. He touched the thread with reverent fingers. "You made this." "I did." He folded it, tucked it into his pocket. "I'll carry it," he said, "on days when the wind feels too heavy." She didn't cry, not yet, but something in her stitched itself whole. The sun was already low when the train hissed away, taking with it the last echo of her name. She sat on a weathered crate near the edge of the station platform, a blue dress tucked carefully beneath her knees, the hem already catching dust from the prairie wind. It was the dress she'd sewn herself, 3 months of thread and thimble and whispered prayers stitched into every seam. A hopeful dress, a good dress, but the man it was meant for never showed. Behind her, the town was soft and distant, just a few plank buildings, a saloon with one shutter hanging off, and a crooked church steeple that leaned westward like it had grown tired of pointing heavenward. A wagon rattled by, horses slow in the heat, and the driver didn't even glance her way. "You're not the first," she heard a voice say, "and you won't be the last." She turned to find an older woman with a kind but unsmiling face, holding a loaf of bread wrapped in muslin. Her hands were work-worn. Flour clung to the edges of her sleeves like snow that never melted. "I own the bakery," the woman said simply. "Come when you're ready. You don't have to tell me your name." She didn't. Not yet. She stayed on that crate until the light bled away, until the crickets began to sing like sorrow in the grass. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, where she had once imagined a figure riding toward her. Tall, strong, eager, that dream had already crumbled, quietly, without drama, without kindness, just silence. Earlier that morning, she had stepped off the train with a satchel that held her wedding dress, a comb carved from bone, and a letter folded so many times the ink had worn thin. She'd read it again and again during the journey. "I await your arrival with anticipation. The Lord has blessed me with a home, and soon a wife to share it. I believe you are that blessing." She believed it too. Enough to leave Missouri behind. The cracked sidewalks, the whispers from neighbors, the scent of root cellar onions that clung to every woman's apron. Enough to stand before a mirror and wonder what kind of man would see her and think, yes, her, but hours passed, and he did not come. A boy from the station office wandered out as dusk crept in, holding an envelope with her name scrawled in unfamiliar script. It was new, the ink was fresh, the message brief. "Circumstances have changed. I regret to inform you I cannot proceed. You are young and I've reconsidered." That was all. No name signed, no explanation offered, no carriage, no apology, just young. As if that were a crime. She sat in silence as the paper slid from her hand and drifted beneath. The crate like a leaf that no longer cared for seasons. The woman from the bakery. Her name turned out to be Mrs. Galloway, returned at twilight with a shawl and a lantern. "Cold's coming in," she said. "Even summer nights bite on the plains." They walked in silence back to the bakery, the scent of yeast and sugar hanging in the air like a promise that life could still be warm. Upstairs, above the ovens, was a narrow room with a cot, a basin, and a window that looked out over the nothingness beyond the fields. "You can stay," the woman said, setting down a folded blanket. "No rent, just sweep in the mornings and don't burn the bread." The girl, still unnamed, nodded. "I'll return the favor," she whispered. "No need," Mrs. Galloway replied, already turning for the door. "I've housed worse." Then she paused, her hand resting on the doorknob. "Some men," she said, without looking back, "are made of wind. They sound like something coming, but they leave nothing behind." Days passed, then weeks, she found. Work at the general store, then as a seamstress for a tailor who didn't ask too many questions. Her hands, once uncertain, moved with practiced grace over fabric. Needles calmed her. Thread obeyed. Stitch by stitch, she mended her silence into usefulness. The town was small, and people talked softly, then less so. They didn't say her name, for they didn't know it. But they referred to her as the one who got left. Sometimes she'd walk past the station just to see it again. The place where she'd last been, someone's hope. But now it was just wood and nails, and no train came through without reminding her of the one that took away her dignity without even making a sound. Some wounds don't bleed, she once thought to herself, they just echo. She wrote no letters. There was no one to write to. Her parents were long buried, her sisters married off in states far away. All she had was the blue dress, folded now at the bottom of a trunk, and the smell of fresh bread that rose through the floorboards each morning. It was enough, or at least it would have to be. One Sunday, she attended church and sat in the back. Not to pray, she wasn't sure who was listening anymore, but to feel less alone. The preacher spoke of Jonah, of storms and swallowed men, of second chances. She didn't believe in second chances, but she liked the way the stained glass caught sunlight and painted the pews in color. Outside, children ran barefoot in the dust. A couple laughed too loudly outside the mercantile, hands touching for no reason other than love. And she, the bride who never wed, walked home alone, but her steps didn't drag, not anymore. One afternoon, as she closed the shop early due to a broken latch on the door, a horse passed by, chestnut brown, with a rider dressed in worn denim and boots dulled by time. He wasn't young, wasn't old, just weathered like the fence posts that stood longer than storms. He looked at her, just briefly, not with pity, not curiosity, just recognition, and then he rode on. She stood still for a long while after, hand on the doorframe, heart oddly quiet. Later that night, as she climbed the stairs above the bakery, she paused at the window that faced the west. Out there, beyond the golden fields and bending grass, the sun was slipping down behind the horizon, like it was shy of being seen. She thought of the crate she sat on weeks ago, of the dress she made, of the man who changed his mind, and suddenly, just briefly, she didn't feel forgotten, just hidden, like a seed that hadn't sprouted yet.